This is LMU Scott Erland back again with LMU men's basketball coach Josh Schertz. Part of our 2015-16 preview. Now we're moving on to part two, and this is the front court. We're talking about the post players. Coach, very varied group of posts. You got a nice mix of athleticism, depth, and varying talents. Just talk about that group in general, kind of the feel you have for that group right now.
Well, I think we're a young group in there for the most part. You got, Emmanuel and Dorian are sophomores. You got Nixon Blanc, who's a redshirt freshman. Then you got some experience with Curtis McMillian and Paul Woodson. So you got really 5 guys in there. I do think that, there's a lot of upside on the interior. I also think there's a lot of questions that they got to answer. I think it's one of those deals where as the year went on, Emmanuel's minutes grew. And I think, Dorian's minutes were kind of up and down, and so you got to figure out for those guys, can they be reliable, can they be dependable, can they be guys that come and bring it on a consistent basis. We think they can. We think they're going to both be outstanding players here. Both those guys are just sophomores, but it's a lot of pressure on them to do that, but we think they can. Same thing with Nixon Blanc. He's going into his first year here as a redshirt freshman. And then the 2 veterans with Curtis McMillian, 5th-year guy. Kurt's a guy that is really valuable for us because he's the one guy in the front court who can play with anybody else. You can play Kurt with Dorian and Paul, or you can play Kurt with Emmanuel and Nixon because he has the flexibility to kind of play the 4 or the 5, and he can, like I said, because of his skill set and his size, do whatever we need to get done. So it does provide a lot of flexibility. We will have to play a little bit differently. I think just the way the makeup of our team is, and then do some things differently. But that's something where I think a couple of those guys, particularly Dorian and Paul, can almost be playmakers for us, point forwards for us. So we'll mess with some things and kind of see how it looks, and hopefully the key for those guys is to obviously that group of 5 is to continue their growth, continue to work to become dependable, reliable guys, and guys that we can count on a game-to-game basis.
And one of the things that's going to be really interesting for you, and I know we've talked about this, is the kind of, with them having all such different kind of talents and the mix and match there, it's going to be an interesting choice for you throughout the year of who to play together. The two, because traditionally you play 3 guards and 2 forwards. You've alternated from that from time to time when the situation calls for it. But it'll be interesting, and also a unique choice for you about who to play with who when that your 2 forwards to play. Just talk about juggling that from your perspective.
Well, you'd like to have a rotation of 4 big men. I think that's ideal. We have 5 that I think can all play. Like you said, it's going to really be kind of a game-to-game basis. It's important for me and for those guys to stay malleable and understand that that this night it may be this, and it calls for this, and this game calls for that, and so that we do have 5. Then there'll be times where we play small. There'll be times where we play Luquan and Webb, who are swings, can play up at the 4, and we did that probably 35 or 40% of the time last year. We did that a big chunk of time. We played small. I think we'll probably play small less this year than we did last year, but I think we still we'll do that some. So guys have to be, and I think they are, in terms of they're good character guys. They're also smart guys. They understand that some nights it's their night, sometimes it's not. Game dictates that, and their performance dictates that. I think a lot of times you get into playing time, and it's not just with the bigs, but I think with the whole group, it's not always the best players. It's how guys complement each other. So if this guy does this and that guy, how does that help this guy? And does this guy help another guy? And so when looking at it from the backcourt or in the front court, you want guys that complement one another. So that's something that we're constantly working on. What lineups complement, or what players complement each other to create the best lineups. And we do have probably, we're in a situation probably got 10 or 11 guys that can play. So that's a luxury if the guys are the right people, and I think we do have the right people. But it's also one of those things, that from my end I've got to really be on point with in terms of thinking about our rotations and looking at different things and constantly trying to fit pieces together. 'Cause I do think we have a wide variety of things we can do from both the interior and on the perimeter.
Just talking about some of the individual pieces, you mentioned Emmanuel a couple times, a guy who averaged just a little bit over 8 minutes per game last year, but was unbelievable when in his times when he had some flashes where it was unbelievable. I should say, 4.1 points, 4.5 rebounds, 1.1 blocks, led your team in blocks in that limited playing time. I know that everyone inside of that program, including yourself, is incredibly high on him. Just talk about what you're expecting to see him in another year of college seasoning under his belt.
Yeah, well, you put all those numbers up, and we're kind of idiot only plays that guy 8 minutes a game. So, no, he's a guy that has a chance to be very, very special. He's got incredible talent, buffered by tremendous work ethic and great character. Emmanuel's a guy that cares deeply about, and feels tremendous responsibility towards his teammates. He's a guy that wants to do well. He cares about it. He's grown leaps and bounds from his freshman year. The biggest thing with E last year was trying to get him to execute on both sides of the ball, to be disciplined and, like you talked about, reliable. A lot of times that has to, experience kind of has to play into that. He's done a much better job here heading into his sophomore year, at least on the practice floor, of showing that he's a guy that understands the execution component that goes into it on both sides of the ball. But like you said, in limited bursts last year, he was a guy that really can impact the game. He's much stronger. His offensive skill set's come a long way, and I think he's as good a shot blocker, rebounder probably as there is in the South Atlantic Conference, in those two areas. So he's a guy that has to, he can protect the rim for us. He runs the floor well. He's a guy we got to do some different things to help him. He's not, typically what we've had. He's not, what I would call an anchor down there. He's not, Vinny Bailey or Keenan Peterson. He's not a 240, 50-pound guy. So we've got to tweak some things to help him and put him in the right positions. But he's a guy that is, in my opinion, is going to be a very special player here over the next few years, and a guy that's going to play basketball for a very long time and make a lot of money doing it, because he's a very unique talent, and like I said, is the intangibles are off the charts. So when you combine great talent with unbelievable intangibles, sky's the limit for Emmanuel.
And you talked about Keenan Peterson. He was an anchor down low in the post last year, but other than that, you returned the entire group that played in the post last year. And your team last year led the nation in opponent field goal percentage, ranked 9th in the country in total blocks. And really, you bring back, like we said, Emmanuel Terry led the team in blocks. Then you got Curtis McMillian, who also was second on the team at 23 blocks. It really seems like the ceiling is high defensively for that group, as they can, with their athleticism and depth, really provide a just stingy back line. And then you're factoring in Paul Woodson too, who's also a great athlete and long and has the opportunity to block shots. Do you agree with that there is a really high ceiling defensively for this group?
Yeah, I think Emmanuel will be as good a rim protector as there is in Division II. I really believe that. I don't know everybody in there, but I couldn't imagine there's a better one. And that doesn't mean he's going to lead the country in blocks or anything like that, but it does mean that he's going to block shots, alter shots, and so he's a guy that I think the bigs are always your, generally the back line of your defense. They have a major responsibility with how good your defense is relative to, pick and roll coverages and helps and rotations and things like that, and I think those guys did a good job last year anchoring the defense. Emmanuel's, his biggest thing is to make sure that he's solid, doesn't gamble, and get himself out of position. Dorian, kind of the same thing. Paul is as good as I've ever had. Paul Woodson understands the game as well as cerebral a player as I've ever coached. He understands everything going on there. Dorian's very much in the same vein, and I think, like I said, you got guys like McMillian, Emmanuel Terry, who are terrific shot blockers. I think Nixon's a guy, Blanc, that's going to be a guy down there that can block shots, protect the rim, and will be a guy that'll be a good backline defenders. So I do agree. I think the potential's there to be very sound defensively. Obviously, you don't want to have to block too many shots. It means you're getting dribble all the time. But the goal, I think, like I said, when we recruit, certainly is something we take into consideration, and I think we have some guys back there that can help kind of anchor the defense.
When you had mentioned too that Dorian Pinson and Paul Woodson could be like point forward types for you, how would dropping Dorian or Paul into that type of situation and letting them play that way change up your style offensively, as opposed to maybe in years past when you had Vinny Bailey, Keenan Peterson, and Desmond Johnson, guys who preferred to play more on the inside and bang on the inside?
Well, it's going to be a change. I think there's a couple factors that go into that. One is, with a guy like Dorian, and I think Paul's in that same category, they're guys who can bring the ball, which I think it allows us to play with more pace. They're guys that are comfortable being playmakers. I think we were a little bit probably, the last couple of years, you got a guy at the point like Lorenza, who is a dominant playmaker, and so you have to play to his strengths, and I think we try to do that and play to Keenan's strengths or Vinny's strengths, and now with this group, you have to figure out, with lineups, what's best for this, how the guys comment. And one of the things that I like, if we're playing with a Jalen, with a Lou and a Jarrell, is having a guy at the 4 that we can run offense through. And we're fortunate to have 2 guys in that situation, in Dorian and Paul, that are guys that we can run offense through, and that can distribute the ball, that we can put in situations where they can make reads, and they're guys that handle it and pass it. They're both exceptionally smart guys. And so I think, that's going to be something that will be, with this group, something that we'll definitely look at, and we'll change a lot of what we've done. And I think we did last year from what we did with the year before with Vinny Bailey, really playing through him. And the year before that, we had a guy like Jake Trolley, where he ran a lot more high-low stuff, lifting him. And so it's a constant tweaking. You don't get away from your non-negotiable, but a constant tweaking to try to put these guys in the right position to be successful. And with that lineup, we talked about having a playmaking 4, I think really complements those other 4 guys very, very well.